What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So a topic of conversation that has come up quite a bit recently is aftermarket triggers. Now we've been talking about this a little bit on our Wednesday night chats with Big Johnson Guns and Gear and 1776 or Bust, but you guys have also been talking about it in the comments, especially after the release of the Apex M&P 2.0 Flatty trigger. So I thought it was a good opportunity to take a step back and just have a conversation about aftermarket triggers. Now, in the comments, a lot of people were saying that they love them and there are a lot of different brands that they use. And some people were saying that, that they really just stay away from aftermarket triggers. Now, I will tell you, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I've owned guns that have had aftermarket triggers. I've got some in front of us here we're going to talk about, but I've also owned a lot of guns over the years that have been completely stock, and they're great. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. However, I will say I am a fan of aftermarket triggers. Now, I've got a couple of examples here to show you guys. This first one is a Glock 19C. Now, this has a Overwatch Precision Falx trigger in it. And one thing I really like about this trigger, this is actually one of their curved designs rather than their attack or DAC triggers that are a little bit more flat. But this one is, it's all aluminum, and it's got the trigger bar with it that's got the NP3 coating rather. And this safety lever right here completely disappears within the face of the trigger. That's one thing about Glock stock triggers. Their safety lever, you can definitely still feel it. Again, nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but if you can kind of clean things up, clean the feel of a trigger up a little bit, I think that's a great opportunity to do so. Now, in terms of the trigger pull here, there's not a lot of distance until you get to that wall, and it's a nice defined wall. And then once you get to it, just pull right through, and you've got a really nice clean break. And then your reset, that good audible Glock reset that Glocks are definitely known for. Once again, it just kind of changes the dynamic and the feel of this trigger a little bit. And I think it just makes the enjoyment at the range, at least for me, that much better. Now, another Glock 19, and this is the Gen 5 right here. This has an Apex almost completely flat trigger on it. It's their pretty traditional flat trigger, but this is, again, specific for the Gen 5. They've got different models out there, so make sure you get the right one if you're interested. But one thing I really like about this, it's got a really wide face on it. So there's plenty of area or plenty of real estate to put your finger. And that safety lever, again, completely disappears within the face of the trigger itself. And you're basically right at the wall. You've got very little distance to go, maybe 1.5 millimeters or so. And once you do, you're right there at your break, and it's nice and crisp and audible. And then your reset, once again, very clean, crisp, audible, tactile, the whole 9 yards. And it just makes that trigger pull, again, I think, feel really good and really smooth. Another trigger, and this is on the CZP-10C. This is a trigger by HB Industries, and I just think this is a really cool looking trigger. They've got a couple of different options and different colors for the triggers, including purple if you're into that. But this is basically a flat trigger, and the P10 trigger was almost flat to begin with, although this has a completely flat surface on it with just a little bit of a protrusion down at the bottom. Your safety lever, again, disappears completely within the face, and it's a very wide trigger. So there's plenty of real estate putting your the pad of your finger on, or if you wrap your finger around like I do, because I've got long fingers, there's plenty of real estate, and it just feels really good. And then you get to that, that pull, and it's very smooth, just a short distance until you get to your wall. And there's your break, and it's nice, crisp, and audible. And then your reset is right there, and it's basically the same reset as the P10C. There isn't a lot of change in there, but once again, I think the trigger itself just feels good. It's an aluminum trigger rather than a polymer trigger, and it feels good, and frankly, I just think it kind of looks cool. But then last but not least, this is definitely the one that's kind of sparked these conversations a little bit. This is, again, the Flatty trigger for the M&P 2.0. Apex just released this basically to coincide with the M&P 2.0 compact, so it was really good timing on Apex's part. And one of the things that I criticized about Smith & Wesson 2.0s, but even the 1.0 as well, is their hinged trigger. I'm not a big fan. There's nothing wrong with that. I know a lot of people are fans of it, and that's perfectly fine. For me, the fact that they broke all the way at the very end of the housing right here, basically up against the frame, that was a little bit of a problem because, again, I wrap my finger through. My fingers are long. So having to go all the way back to the very back of the housing just wasn't a lot of fun for me. So this trigger does a couple of things. It certainly shortens up that pull, and it also makes it incredibly smooth. There's no grit or any sandpaper feeling or anything, which can happen in M&Ps. So your wall is just right there, and then your break, and it's nice and short and crisp. And again, it doesn't go all the way back to the frame right here. And then you get to your reset, and there's your reset right there, and you're back out to the start. And it's just incredibly clean, incredibly smooth. And I will say this has probably become one of my very favorite triggers of all time. Now, again, this is not a video about any of these triggers specifically or these companies, just some different options to kind of spur the conversation a little bit. But I'm very curious to know what you guys think about aftermarket triggers. So a couple of questions. Do you use aftermarket triggers? And if so, what triggers do you use? I'm really curious about that. But then also, if you don't use aftermarket triggers, why? And again, there are no wrong answers with this whatsoever. It's just a great opportunity to have a conversation and talk a little bit about this in the comments. So do be sure to leave some comments down below. I'm really interested to hear your guys' opinion on this. Do be sure to join us on Wednesday nights. We talk about these sorts of topics and all sorts of other things in the firearm universe. So join us there. And otherwise, thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.